Sometimes, with all the goodwill in the world on your part, relationships with school still break down. If your child doesn't have a diagnosis and you're trying to get an assessment, it doesn't have to go through the school SENCO. You can go through the school nurse or you can go through your GP. Both have the ability to refer to the next stage of the pathway. The school nurse can refer to CAMHS, the GP can refer to both CAMHS and the paediatricians. So if you've tried going through the SENCO and aren't getting anywhere, you really do have other options open to you. Ultimately, once the diagnosis is underway, school will be spoken to, but it's likely that as well as the teacher's word being taken into account, someone from an external service will come in and observe your child in school as well. So if you really feel like there are things there that are going on that perhaps the teachers aren't picking up on, then that is a route you can go down. If you're still struggling to get a diagnosis through those routes, you can go down the avenue of getting a private assessment. Your best source of information about those is on the National Autistic Society website, and they also, if you phone their helpline, will be able to give you a list of people in your area who carry out those assessments. Do be aware, however, that they can be quite expensive, and on top of that, not all authorities will use them. What they can be useful for in virtually all authorities is a bit of a battering ram to get people to take you seriously and carry out their own assessments and find out exactly what is going on. It should also be remembered that if your child is struggling in school, support in school is not dependent upon a diagnosis, it's dependent on need. So although if your child doesn't have an autism diagnosis or a PDA diagnosis, because I know that's something lots of families are struggling with at the moment, it shouldn't affect how much support they're entitled to if they are having difficulties. All it will mean is that they're assessed on the criteria for children with emotional and behavioural difficulties rather than on the autism criteria in terms of how much support they get and why. But in reality, it should make very little difference to whether or not they get an EHCP or don't. If your child does have a diagnosis and you're still struggling to get help from school, then the educational psychologist report done at the time of diagnosis should give lots of pointers as to strategies that can be used to help your child progress further. Using this in your meetings with schools to ask which of these are being followed, how and why, is a really good objective starting point to use. If things still aren't working, asking if the LEA autism team could be called in for advice could be a really helpful next step. They will be a team of autism specialists, some will be teachers, some are teaching assistants, but with lots of knowledge and lots of background in autism. They often don't work with the children and young people directly, but what they will do is come in, observe and give strategies and advice to the staff that work with them on a day-to-day basis, and their advice really can be helpful. They're also really useful if you are in the process of applying for an EHCP in terms of what things are currently ticking the boxes at the LEA, because they come across so many children. They're often far more in the loop than classroom teachers are. So if you are applying for an EHCP, getting them on board and getting them to look over the paperwork from school that's being sent can be really, really helpful too. If school are saying they don't feel an EHCP is necessary and you feel this needs to be looked into further, you can apply for one of those directly from the LEA yourself. It won't change the criteria, so it's worth asking the LEA before you go to the trouble of applying for one if you can have a look at the criteria and talking to school about why they feel or don't feel that your child fits each of those. If you feel they need that EHCP and school are just being difficult, you can ring the LEA and request it, and that can be done on the basis of parental request. Again, just like in the case of a diagnosis, the opinion of the school will be asked at a later state, but it's likely that other professionals will be involved and will come in and carry out observations as well. If your child has an EHCP, the EHCP should have recommendations in it, and that's a legal document. So if school aren't following the number of hours of support they should get or the recommendations within there, then you are within your rights to complain, both to the head and to the LEA. It is worth doing. Parents who stand up and complain often get more than those who don't, however uncomfortable that makes us feel. If even after doing that you feel it's really not working, please do think about whether a different school would be a better option. It took us 3 schools to get it right, but in the end we did, and I have never been happier that we made those changes, because it made such a big difference. I know it's a really difficult prospect, especially if you have a child who finds change really, really difficult, but sometimes the short and difficulty of the change is much easier to contend with than the long-term difficulties of being in an environment that just doesn't work for them. Again, if you have any questions or need any help, please do get in touch and I'll be happy to do so.